Thank you for joining our December's public community call, where we have an interesting session every month. This month too, we have an interesting session on MSAL. We're continuing our MSAL series. We started with MSAL integration. How do you integrate Azure AD into your React applications, Angular applications, and we did one on Electron desktop applications. And then we also had a video on, how you customize claims and all that. So if you have not checked out those videos or you could not join those calls, I will be sharing a link of a YouTube channel where you can view all those recordings. There's a playlist that I've created. You can look at all those videos. So just like every month, this month too, an interesting call aligned for you. We have a great amount of speakers today. Our architect, Kyle, who's a very frequent speaker on this platform, is there in the call today. We have three new faces, Pramod, Jitesh, and Bogdan. They all are from our Identity Ace team who work with our customers, helping them resolve their scenarios. I'll probably let them introduce themselves to you, but then this month, we're going to concentrate on migrating an ASP.NET Core application, which is using ADAL to MSAL. All right, we already know the drill. We are recording this call. If you don't want to be part of the call that is getting recorded, feel free to drop. We're going to share a survey. We would love to get your feedback on the session and also what kind of topics you would like to hear from us. So I'll be sharing this link in the survey. Please go ahead and fill that out. We have this YouTube channel, which I'm going to again share on the chat, which has a list of all the videos that we've been doing for a year or two. If you missed out any of the videos, go ahead and check it out. You can follow me on LinkedIn to know what's coming up next on the platform community call or in general, any of these activities that we do on Azure AD Developer, right? You can also follow us on Twitter at Microsoft 365 Dev or Azure AD, where we not only put things about these events and programs, but we also talk a lot about product. The next call is going to be in January. It's going to be January 19th, and it's going to be on Graph. Again, an interesting call lined up for all of you folks based on the suggestions that you provided in the survey. So before I hand it over to Pramod, if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat. Again, we would love to get your inputs on what you want next. So feel free to put in those comments in the survey. So with that, I hand it over to Pramod. Pramod, if you want to quickly introduce the team and then get on with the call.
Okay, thanks, Nandeesh. Hello, everyone. This is Pramod here. As Nandeesh mentioned, I am part of our ACE app and dev team, where we will be working closely with our developer customers, assisting them integrating their applications in application to Azure AD. So I think we have Kyle Marsh in the call as well, who is in the architect, who is from the architect team. Along with that, we have a couple of my colleagues as well, Jitesh, Nair, and Bogdan, who will be driving through this call. That's a quick intro about us. So yeah, so let's look at the agenda for today. Okay, so I think today mainly we will touch upon these points. We will quickly start. We will briefly talk about why do we need to migrate an ADAL application to MSAL. Quickly to understand what are the reasons we need to migrate, and then we'll jump on to some kind of a hands-on kind of experience, in the sense. Let us say if you have a web-based application, we'll mainly focus on the area as a developer. What are the steps or what are the things that you need to do to migrate your application from ADAL to MSAL. On that journey, we are taking an example here that is nothing but ASP.NET Core web-based applications. There are a couple of options that we will evaluate today. One of the option is, which is the recommended approach, is moving an ASP.NET Core application from ADAL to Microsoft Identity.web. I will explain what is Microsoft Identity.web in the demo while I talk, while I get to that part. And also there is another approach where we could use the ADAL.NET in a ASP.NET Core web-based application. and migrate it to MSAL.net. So those are the two options we will walk through, and then finally we will have a quick summary on the things that we touched upon. So that is the agenda for today's call. So just to summarize, basically we will be mostly spending our time on how to do the migration. What are the steps that we need to take, rather than why do we need to do the migrations. So yeah. Next is, I think most of you might be aware on why do we need to migrate. So you might be aware of the fact that ADAL library is in a deprecation, has a deprecation path. No features have been added to ADAL since June 30th, 2020, and there are no ADAL features released planned either. So whatever the focus or the energy or the efforts from Microsoft standpoint, all those things are going through the MSAL. So that is the one of the reasons why it is important for an application which is using ADAL to be get migrated to MSAL, so that they can be up to date with the security related fixes as well. Along with the security related fixes, MSAL does offer additional features such as continuous access evaluation, auth broker support, Azure AD certificate based authentication on mobile, and system browsers on mobile devices as well. If you are interested in understanding what these capabilities are, I would suggest you to go through our landing page on ADAL to MSAL, where we have clearly defined what are these features, how do we enable them, and how MSAL using MSAL, how we can leverage all these features. I will also try to touch upon these features while we do the migration, but mostly, as I mentioned earlier, I'll focus on the coding part, or the steps that we need to take to migrate the application. With that, I think maybe I'll quickly share my screen. So we discussed, we understand the thing is we need to, it is important for an application to migrate to MSAL. Now I am taking an example here. This example is one of the more popular examples that were available, that is still available in our in official page, where it is a web ASP.NET Core web application calling a web API, which is in ASP.NET Core. I would presume there are a lot of customers who have referenced this ADAL sample and built their application on top of it. Right. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the same sample which was put up, which is using the ADAL, and making that migration move over here. Just to give you a context, this is simple web-based application written in ASP.NET Core 2.0, and it also has a web service. There are two API calls, or I would say controller API controllers, get and set. It's basically a to-do item. You can just put a string, it'll add that string, and it'll also list the string, right? So this is the API. This API is called by this web app, right? So to call this API, web app is basically doing the authentication. While it does the authentication, it is also acquiring the access token and stitching that access token in a bearer header and calling the to-do list service. So let me just quickly run this sample just for your reference, how it basically looks like. So when I ran this, it is loading both API, running the API application as well as the web app application. So while I this web application is loaded, it is taking me to the authentication page. So if you can observe here, itself, it is using the V1 endpoint. There is no V2 in the URL. That itself is an indication that the application is using ADAL. Okay, so let me punch in one of the dummy. Okay, so let me just use a dummy user over here. So I'll go ahead and I'll hit in the credential. So as I mentioned, this is a basic web-based application which has prompted me a to-do list. So when I click on the to-do list, it is making an API call to that API bearer token. So if I say 1, 2, 3, I can add a to-do list item, and maybe I'll add one more, 4, 5, 6. That's it. So this is a typical web application calling a API architecture. So as I mentioned earlier, there was an indication that it was using the V1 endpoint, which indicates that it is a ADAL application. From an admin perspective, how do you identify this application is using ADAL library? It's basically you can rely on a sign-in logs, right? So there'll be I just ran this sample maybe 15 minutes ago, and I could see that I just came here and I clicked on this and additional details information. I can clearly see that this application is making a call using ADAL library. Right, so that is one of the factors. As an from an admin perspective, you can look at the sign-in logs to see that this is an ADAL application. Another approach would be to there is a if you go to the ADAL to MSAL migration landing page, as I mentioned, there is also a link where we could monitor the workbook solution, which will list the ADAL apps as well. So for example, I have already configured that workbook in my tenant. If I go to the workbook solutions and click on the sign-ins information in the last 4 hours, I there is a separate section which will have a specific queries, Custo queries, which will list the ADAL application. So here we see there is a sample application that is community live to-do list demo, and it is using the ADAL.NET library reference. So this is from the admin perspective. As a developer, how do you identify that your application is using ADAL? It's just maybe you can have a search on a namespace called Microsoft Identity Model Clients.Active Directory. If you find that in your project, that means it is using the ADAL. Another popular or one of the main class in ADAL library is called as authentication context. If you search the authentication context class in the project, and if you see that if it is available, then yes, that means this application using the ADAL. Just to give you a perspective on how this web application is running is, if you look at the startup, it is basically using the OpenID module of the ASP.NET Core to authenticate the user. Along with the authentication, it is using basically the hybrid flow to get the authorization code, and from the authorization code, I think we are subscribing. Yeah. So if you see here in the code or on authorization code received, we are creating a class called authentication context, which exists in the ADAL library. We are creating an object, ADAL object, and acquiring a token via authorization code flow. Right. So, and then while we make the to-do controller, in the to-do controller view, before we call the API, we try to acquire the token silently. Here is the code: acquire token silent. Whatever the access token that we have acquired from the authorization code flow, we will get that token over here and stitch it to a bearer token, and then finally make the API call. Right. So from a developer perspective, I know this application is using ADAL. Now, how do I go about it? Right. So I want to migrate this to the latest library that Microsoft offers. Right. So if I'll be referencing you to our landing page on ADAL to MSAL, where we have a guide basically on ADAL to .NET and MSAL.NET. For each platform, for that matter, we have a separate guide which will explain the step-by-step procedure to make the changes on your application. So in this application, what we have seen is ADAL to MSAL.NET. So there are two options. I have two options. One of the options is there is a library called Microsoft Identity.web, which is nothing but a wrapper built on top of MSAL.NET and has additional capabilities or additional features specifically for web-based application and web APIs, right? So that is exactly this flowchart describes you. For example, if you want to choose between Microsoft Identity.web and MSAL.NET, here is the flowchart that makes easier for you to choose. For example, the question is whether your .NET application is a web-based application or not. If it is not, if it is a desktop console app, you should go for MSAL.NET. If it is a web-based application, whether this application is using ASP.NET Core. If it is ASP.NET Core, then you go with the Microsoft Identity.web. If you are building a new application, we recommend you to use the project template, .NET Core project template. If not, you need to make the manual existing changes. Right now, in our case, we know that I already have an ASP.NET Core application which is using ADAL. Now I have to migrate it to Identity.web, right? So I have to do some manual changes, right? So that is the approach that I will be taking over here. Another approach is, we could also use the MSAL.NET in ASP.NET Core web application, which is something that is my colleague Bogdan will walk you through once I'm finished with the migration from ADAL to Identity.web. Okay, so now let me do that. So let me close this ADAL application. As I mentioned earlier, this application is in ASP.NET Core 2.2, which is an unsupported version of the Microsoft, and also our Microsoft Identity.web is not compatible with ASP.NET Core 2.0. And hence, what I have done is I have migrated this ASP.NET Core 2.2 to .NET 6, which is the minimum supported version from Microsoft standpoint. How do we migrate? I just followed the instructions that we have on .NET Core 2.2 to .NET 6 migration step-by-step procedures. Of course, there are some manual changes that I had to do. So I have already made those changes in this sample. So and I also kept that sample in the GitHub repo as well, just for reference. So what I'll do is here is instead of taking the ASP.NET Core 2.2 project, I will take the project which is migrated to .NET 6, as I'll not be going through all the steps of the .NET Core migration because that is something that is out of scope of this call. So I'll take the migrated .NET 6 project as a base point, and I'll try to remove the reference of ADAL and try to use the Identity.web. Okay, so I have already ran this or cloned this project, and my application is, if you can see here, it's already upgraded to .NET 6, right? So let's see what are the changes it takes to use the Identity.web. Okay, so I have documented some of the changes that we need to do because it's, we need to just try that out. For example, first step would be to identify ADAL reference. I already showed you what are the keyword searches that you need to do to search the ADAL references, right? Authentication context class, as well as the namespace that you can search. I can clearly see that these NuGet packages are available. Let me get rid of this NuGet packages. By the way, Web API doesn't use ADAL, so I don't need any changes in the Web API. So whatever the changes that I'm doing, it is in the web app. Okay, I have got rid of the references of ADAL. I have to install the NuGet packages, Microsoft Identity.ui. As I mentioned, Identity.web is a wrapper on top of MSAL.NET. Similarly, there is another package called Identity.web.ui, which is another wrapper on top of Identity.web, which gives additional features of authentication, meaning the UI, sign in and sign out, basically when we have sign in and sign out, right? So those two options are also handled by this Identity.web.ui. In addition to this Identity.web.ui, I'm also using a reference of Newtonsoft. Let me quickly install that NuGet package as well. Okay, so now I think let's comment out some of the code which is not necessary in case of ADAL. So in case of Identity.web, sorry. Here, as I mentioned, it was using the authorization code flow, right? So after the first leg of the authentication, the code is received and then the code is exchanged with the access token. So we had to have a manual code, explicit code to do this stuff, right? So we created ADAL.net ADAL object, which is nothing but authentication context, and then got the access token. So all these things are abstracted in Identity.web. Identity.web will take care of all this, subscribing the event and getting the token. All those things are handled, so we can straight away comment, or maybe what I'll do is I'll delete this whole file itself. One more option is reading the client ID, tenant ID, secret. All those information are again taken care by Identity.web by itself. So I don't need to have a separate class for that as well. So I have deleted that reference too. So now Identity.web also provides me in-memory cache as well. I don't need this code where I have written a native session cache to update the cached information into the session and then read it. So all those things are taken care by Identity.web itself. So I can remove this file too. Since I'm using the account identity.web.ui library, my sign in and sign out controller actions are also handled by that library itself. So I can remove the account controller class as well. Right. So I'm good here. So now what I'll do is in the startup.cs class. So as I mentioned earlier, this is used module of ASP.NET Core, to do the authentication. So let me get rid of this this part and use our. I'll have to paste some of the namespaces that I'm doing it over here so that I can reference the identity.web. So I will go ahead and paste this over here. The important thing to be noticed is I'm hooking this middleware called add Microsoft Identification Web Authentication and passing the configuration object. Okay, along with the configuration object, I'm also saying that I would like to acquire the token to call my API, right? What are the API that I need to call? So go and look in the configuration. That's nothing but in the to-do list scope, right? So this is the configuration that I need to update it, which I will do it in a while. And also for the demonstration purpose, I'm using the add in memory token cache, just to replace that session cache that ADAL used to use. And then in order to use the sign in and sign out controller action, I am also using the add Microsoft Identity UI middleware as well. Okay, so that is done. I'm good. So I have to use the JSON, right? As I mentioned, I'm explicitly saying to the library that I need to acquire the token while I do the authentication. So what it'll do is it'll look for the section called to-do list scope in my app settings.json, which is not available in ADAL. So what I'll go ahead and I'll just paste this one. So API ID and user impersonation. So I'll have to update this as well. Okay, I think I had basically I have to use this domain and the tenant ID information, which I will do it right away. 1 second, I have to. I had not updated the latest stuff over here. So what I have to do is I have to basically update this over here. Just give me a second. So basically what I'm doing is this application, whatever the migrated application is, I just cloned it, but I haven't basically replaced this setting. So what I'll do is probably after this changes, let me just run the other one so that it'll be easier to track it out. Okay, so now that change is done, so I can do the other changes later. So this is good. And then I have to move to the to-do controller. Give me a second over here in the to-do controller. So as you can see, it is complaining about the ADAL references as I have removed the ADAL, the package that was installed. So I can comment this off, this code. And I also need to use the identity.web references, right? So what I can do is I'll just declare these variables and create a constructor. I'll explain what this constructor is all about. Is as you can see here in ADAL, I was acquiring this token silently from the session cache, right? So instead of that, what I have been doing over here is I'm using one of the class called token acquisition clause, which is present in the Identity.web, which is again one of the wrapper to the class that MSAL.net offers as well. So this, what it does is it's basically tries to, it can get you the token silently, whichever is available in the cache. Right, so that is what I have been using. I'm just making use of the dependency injection feature so that these objects are filled enough. Right, so and I'm also creating one method called prepare authentication, where I'm using the token acquisitions class to get the token, get access token for user as thing, right? And then stitching to a bearer token. Now, what I have to do is I have to delete this code, right? Authentication result is not required. And also I need to delete all this code because this code is basically I'm trying to acquire the token silently using ADAL. Instead of this, what I can do is I can just simply use the code that is referenced in the using Identity.web. I can call the prepare authentication client. I made this object as a global object, HTTP client, and then HTTP client directly calls the API. For that API, the bearer token is already stitched, so I'm good here. In the process unauthorized method, I think we are using the ADAL reference, so I can get rid of that ADAL reference as well, and I can redefine this method process unauthorized without ADAL reference. Okay, so if you look at this code, I just commented this code, right? The commented code is, basically we are explicitly removing the cache, etc., and doing some kind of a manual stuff with ADAL. But since Identity.web takes care of all these things, I can just comment off that code as well. So this is the get index method. That means when I click on that to-do list, that's when this action gets controlled, right? So that means it is calling that get API. Now I have to repeat the same to the post API as well. So let me do that. So I can get rid of this authentication result reference. And I can also delete all these things where I'm trying to acquire the token silently. Instead of that code, I can use the simpler code over here, which will acquire the token for me. I'm just serializing that token, the object, and then passing the post async method. One more, I don't need authentication context class as well. With that, I'm pretty much done with my removing the ADAL reference and making use of the Identity.web reference. I think the last few changes are related. Okay, so I have to use the Identity.web.ui sign in and sign out features, right? So what I have to do is I have to go to the basically views. Under the shared folder, there is a login partial. So here we are using the account controller, right? So instead of the account controller, let me use it from the Microsoft Identity controller as well. Okay, with that, my changes are done. Only the change that I need to do is basically update this client ID related information that I'll do it right away from the working scenario. Give me a second. As web API 2. Okay, so let me just compile this. Hopefully it builds. Okay, it succeeded. So let me quickly run this sample. So you can observe, we can just do, just compare the user experience. So we just followed straightforward, steps, right? So it just instead of the ADAL code, we just use the Identity.web straightforward, with following the instructions. And as you can see, here is the indication. Application is already migrated to MSAL because it is using the V2 endpoint, right? So let me go ahead and punch in the credential of a test user. So far user experience was same. It was asking the sign in because I'm using the incognito window, so there's no SSO. So it just prompted for the username and the password, and I'm done. So I can click on the to-do list, so which will call that API as well. So maybe I'll add it. So both get and post methods are done, right? So if you see here, there was absolutely no change from the user experience, right? Though I have changed the complete authentication module from ADAL to Identity.web, from the user aspect, there was absolutely no change from the user experience, right? So that was an indication. One of the indication was, as I said, in the address bar, it is basically will be using the V2 endpoints. So now if you are interested if you want to verify that MSAL is actually is getting used, so you can also go to the sign in logs from the admin perspective, and you will see that instead of the ADAL.NET library, you will see the MSAL.NET library over here. So that completes our migration journey from ADAL to MSAL or Identity.web. With that,
before we hand over to Bogdan, there are just a couple of questions. So you used Newtonsoft library. Is that a requirement?
No.
For the migration?
No.
So you can use any other library that
Yes, Nandeesh.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I just changed a few of the codes where I had to do the to-do list. There was an object called to-do list which I had to serialize. I can do without the Newtonsoft JSON as well.
That's good.
Before I hand it over to Bogdan, I just wanted to give a quick walkthrough of though we have migrated your application. So now your application is, of course, is more secure in a way that the new features, advanced feature, will go through the MSAL library. So if you want to use, for example, one of the features like, right, instead of the secrets, if you want to use the certificate, there's simply few configuration changes that it requires. For example, if I just update this and update my certificate in the key vault and upload the CR file to our app registration, Identity.web will take care of all these things, connecting to key vault and getting that public key, private key, and all those things, and trying to match. So we don't have to worry anything. So it is just a few lines of configuration changes and you are good to go. If you want to use a distributed cache in web application, that is also pretty much easier. We provide built-in support for Redis cache and the SQL service as well. We'll share the link where you can just use this distributed cache in place of in-memory cache as well. That is again just a middleware a component change. That's it. I think there's not much code as well. You could also use the Identity.web in the API project as well, which will take care of your token validation. In the present sample that I had simply demonstrated, it was using the Azure AD.UI library. You could also use Identity.web, which can take care of this scope validation and the token validation stuff as well. So if you're interested, or if you want to do that in the API project, so there are steps that we have documented in one of the repos, which you can just follow it. As this sample, it had only one scope, in this sample, where we just acquired the user impersonation scope and then we just simply called the API. Because ADAL, basically in ADAL world, we request the token for a resource rather than a specific permission. In MSAL world, you could specifically more granular level of scoping you can request. For example, if you can acquire a token for read permission, and at the same time you can do for the write permission, and we can segregate between these scopes and build your logic on top of that. If again it had two controller actions, right? So if you wanted to have a separate granular permissions, you could do with the to-do list read and to read, right? So what are the changes it takes? That is also very minimal changes that it requires on the projects. Again, if you have a large software where there are multiple modules built on top of it, when you sign in, it is especially true when you have a new application, right? Building a new application. So you may want to have, like, instead of showing a consent prompt for the users where there are a lot of consent screens, you could incrementally request for the consent. That kind of a feature is also available in the MSAL. Proof of possession tokens, that is again built on top of the MSAL library. That means instead of access or bearer token techniques, you could also use the POP tokens, which is basically bind to the user device so that it becomes more secure. So if you are want to explore that option, yes, it is available in our docs as well. One more is continuous access evaluation. That is, basically allows to access token to be revoked, when some critical events happens, and then so that you can have a more secured application. So this continuous CAE feature is available in our Graph API at this moment. It's if you want to build your web API in CAE, that is, it is not available yet in public, but if you're using the Graph API, Graph API does completely support the CAE feature as well. Yeah, these are the some good to have, nice to do things to in your application after you migrate your application from ADAL to MSAL. So basically, it will enable all these features for you to implement as a developer in your application. Yeah, that's all from my end. I'll hand it over to my colleague Bogdan, who is going to walk you through the same sample. Instead of using migrating to Identity.web, he will migrate it to MSAL.net. Over to you, Bogdan. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Pramod. So we have scenarios where developers cannot use Microsoft Identity.web, and they can actually go with integrating directly MSAL.net and Microsoft Identity.web as a hybrid model. We have the second sample from our repository. We're starting from the same startup application, and we are actually documenting in the second article the steps that need to be taken. So we have the same scenario, web application that needs to consume a custom API. And due to the fact that we're only targeting to migrate the application from ADAL to MSAL, the only place where we have ADAL is within the web application. So that's the only place where we're going to do the migrations. Okay, so first of all, we need to deploy some NuGet packages. Let me quickly switch to the NuGet packages. Let me search for them. Microsoft Identity Client is the library that contains MSAL.net. Let me just quickly deploy it. We should have some end user license, accept. Now we got this one. And also we're going to have to use the Identity.web token cache. This is the mix that we're going to use in here because Identity.web will ensure that the token cache management. Okay. Cool. Again, accept. Cool. Now, in order to ease the development, we're gonna need to add. It's best practice to add MSAL app builder class that we're gonna use along the way. So let me just go with adding a new item, and we're gonna briefly go through what it contains. Okay, and now let me get the value. Okay, cool. So what do we do here? We instantiate the confidential client because we're talking about a web application, which can be a confidential client, of course, which is a confidential client. We're defining the cache that we're using. We also have some comments around here on how to define the distributed cache and also the option of removing an account from the cache, specifically calling this. Okay. Then we also need to update the Azure AD authentication build extension. And in here, we're going to comment on the on code, on authorization code received. We're going to comment the pieces. We're going to delete them actually related to ADAL. So we're just going to delete them, and we're going to add pieces related to MSAL. And in here, you can see that we're acquiring a token based on the authorization code for the resource and the /default scope. /default will ensure us that we're going to have backwards compatibility with the ADAL application. So we're just going to request for all the consented permissions that we have at this moment. Okay. Then we're going to go to the actual place where all the ADAL calls are happening here, and this is the to-do list controller. So before adding the places where we're using, don't know exactly why this is not commenting. It should comment. Yeah, well, we had to do another shot. So at the moment when we commented ADAL, the ADAL reference, we can see all the places where we have actually calls done to ADAL. And these are the points where we're going to need to take action overall. But let me just go with the references that we have here to add. We're going to add identity client, Identity.web, and ASP.NET Core HTTP. Okay. And we can remove or comment the call to ADAL, and this will highlight all the places where we have to do changes. Okay, we're going to add, of course, a constructor to the to-do list. Oops, sorry, wrong line. Okay. We're also going to add an get authentication result, and get authentication result is the one that's going to help us with the token, because here we're going to do the token acquisition, the silent token acquisition. Okay, and we're going to reference this one along the way. Okay, and now in the index controller, we're going to remove the ADAL references, and we're going to add the much simpler way of integrating with MSAL. So we're just going to do a call to get the results here for this resource. Of course, that we have this one also on the post controller. So I'm going to do the same step here. Okay. Now, due to the fact that we also have the reference to process unauthorized, and this one was containing the auth context, we're just going to remove the calls from here, the references to the auth context, because we no longer need them. And we're also going to go to the actual process unauthorized, remove the code that belongs to ADAL. Okay. And this was the migration that we did, just adding MSAL.NET to the solution. And now let me just quickly go run the solution. Okay. In the backend, we can see that the API is being loaded. It's loaded at this moment. And now we're going to have the call done for the authentication. So let me quickly log in. So the authentication at this moment is still happening with the ASP.NET Core 2.2 components from the application, and we're requesting for an authorization code. That authorization code is used for getting the access token for the to-do list API, And that's the point where we're using MSAL at this moment. So this was it from just adding ADAL, just adding MSAL to your solution. I think we can also go briefly to the summary. What I wanted to add to this summary. During this call, we have briefly identified the reasoning for migrating from ADAL to MSAL and the techniques for identifying where ADAL is actually used. And we've seen two approaches for migrating an application from ADAL to MSAL. We have the approach when using the Identity.web, which is the recommended one and which Pramod has demonstrated, or just the scenario where, for example, I was having an ASP.NET Core 2.2 that cannot fully integrate with Identity.web, and I actually did the in-place replacement of ADAL with MSAL.NET, only on those specific calls, because we have to ensure the security of our application, and maybe we want to leverage different security features which MSAL is actually capable of doing and ADAL is unable. So we can also see that once you have identified the pattern, once you go through the documentation, the actual investment is in doing this one is not much, because when we had identified the pattern, both me and Pramod did do app migrations in less than I think 45 minutes at this moment, were fairly simple migration. So it's not very hard, because even though you may have a very complex application with a lot of endpoints, the authentication bit is pretty much the same on all the endpoints. So you shouldn't encounter too much of a struggle once you have identified the pattern and once you have identified where you need to do the code changes in your solution. And of course, you can create the internal repositories and everybody can leverage those.
Thanks, Pramod and Bogdan. I mean, it really put into perspective as to like how easy it is to move your ADAL apps to MSAL apps, and essentially why is it really important to move to MSAL, right? I mean, that's really something that we sort of got the messaging through this session. Thanks a lot for that. So before we close, any closing comments for our developers on the call?
We're very interested in any of your journeys of migrations from ADAL to MSAL. We're happy to help. And we appreciate your time as we go through this. So thanks, everybody, for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
There you go, guys. Looking forward to all your migrations and all the questions that you have for us. Thanks a lot for joining. Next month, again, we're going to connect. We have, again, interesting calls. I have put in the survey link. It would be great if you could go ahead and take a quick survey for us. The next call is on January 19th. We're going to have a call on Graph, an interesting call, an interesting speaker again. We will be putting out our amplification messages on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well as our Twitter accounts, Microsoft 365 Dev or Azure AD. Thanks a lot for your time, all folks. Have a good one. Bye-bye.